I can't marry you.
What are you saying?
The woman you were ashamed of is the reason you're standing here today. If you could throw away your mother who sacrificed everything for you, then I don't know who you really are.
David, please.
Sandra stood frozen in her wedding dress as all eyes turned toward her. The happiest day of her life was falling apart before her eyes. But this story didn't begin in a church. It began many years ago in a small village.
Sandra was ashamed of only one person in her life, her own mother. The woman who skipped meals so her daughter could eat. The woman who washed other people's clothes until her hands bled just to pay school fees. The woman who sacrificed everything so Sandra could have a future. But when success finally came, Sandra did the unthinkable. She threw her poor mother out of her life. Years later, on the happiest day of her life, that same mother walked into her wedding. And before the ceremony was over, Sandra would lose everything she had spent years trying to build. Sandra always believed she was meant for more. Even as a little girl, she would sit outside their small mud house and stare at the big road that stretched far beyond the village, watching cars drive past with people inside who wore fine clothes and smiled like they had never known hunger. She would press her tiny fingers together and whisper, "One day, that will be me." Her eyes were big and bright, full of dreams that were too large for the small life around her. The other children played in the dust and laughed about simple things, but Sandra was always somewhere else in her mind, somewhere far away, somewhere beautiful, somewhere rich. Her mother, Mama Rose, noticed this about her daughter from the very beginning. Mama Rose was a small woman with wide shoulders and rough hands, hands that had washed other people's clothes, scrubbed other people's floors, and stirred pots of food sold by the roadside just so Sandra could eat and go to school. She never complained. Not once. Every morning before the sun had fully risen, Mama Rose was already on her feet, tying her wrapper tight around her waist, packing food into trays, and humming a quiet song to herself. She did not hum because she was happy. She hummed because it was the only way she knew how to carry pain without letting it break her. "My daughter will not suffer like me," she always said. "God is watching. My daughter will shine." Sandra's father, Emmanuel, had been a gentle and quiet man who loved his family deeply. He worked small jobs and dreamed of building a better home someday. But sickness came for him before his dreams could. A bad illness wrapped itself around his body slowly, and because they could not afford the medicine the doctor asked for, they could only watch him grow weaker day by day. Sandra was only 9 years old when her father took his last breath on a thin mattress in their one-room home. She remembered holding his cold hand and not understanding why it was so still. She remembered her mother collapsing to the floor and screaming a cry that had no words in it, just pure, broken pain. That night, something changed inside Sandra. She told herself she would never be powerless again. She would never be too poor to save someone she loved. She would escape this life. And escape she did, slowly, painfully, through years of studying under weak lights, eating small meals, and wearing the same school shoes until the soles peeled off. Mama Rose worked double and triple to pay school fees. There were nights she did not eat so Sandra could. There were mornings she walked miles to collect firewood just to save the little money left. And Sandra was brilliant. She read every book, passed every exam, won every prize her small school offered. When the results came out and she got a scholarship to attend university in the city, Mama Rose ran through the whole village shouting and praising God with tears streaming down her dusty face. My daughter is going to university," she screamed. The neighbors came out and clapped. Old women blessed Sandra. Even the village chief heard the news and sent congratulations. It was the happiest day of Mama Rose's entire life. She did not know it would also be the beginning of the most painful chapter of her life. Before we continue, if you enjoy emotional stories with powerful life lessons and unexpected karma, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Now let's begin. The university was like a different world. Sandra stepped onto that campus with one small bag, 2 dresses, and a pair of worn sandals, and she stood in the middle of all that noise and light and beauty with her mouth slightly open. There were girls in heels, boys in designer clothes, people laughing and spending money like it meant nothing. The buildings were tall and clean. The cafeteria had food Sandra had never seen before. And the students, they spoke differently, carried themselves differently, and had a kind of confidence that came not from hard work but from growing up with everything. Sandra had never felt so small in her life. And she decided right there, on that first day, that she would never feel small again. She worked harder than any student on that campus. While other girls went to parties, Sandra stayed up reading. While others complained about assignments, Sandra completed extra work just to be noticed by her lecturers. Her intelligence was real and fierce, and it quickly opened doors. She began to get good grades, earn praise from her professors, and attract the attention of wealthy classmates who respected her sharp mind. Slowly, she started to blend in. She borrowed clothes, learned how to speak and walk differently, and practiced laughing without covering her mouth the way village girls did. She watched everything around her like a student studying life itself, and she copied what she saw. Within 2 years, nobody could tell that Sandra came from a mud house in a poor village. She had become someone else entirely. But the deeper she went into this new world, the more a quiet shame began to grow inside her. When her wealthy friends talked about their families, their parents' jobs, their big houses, their vacations, Sandra would nod and smile and say very little. When they asked about her home, she would change the subject or tell small lies. "My parents are in business," she once said, with a calm face and steady eyes, while Mama Rose was somewhere far away, bent over a pile of other people's dirty clothes, scrubbing until her knuckles bled. Sandra knew the truth. And the truth embarrassed her. She buried it deeper every day, like something rotten she did not want anyone to smell. Mama Rose still called. Her voice through the phone was warm and full of love. "My daughter, how are you eating? Are you sleeping well? Do you have enough money?" Sandra always answered quickly, always sounded rushed. "I'm fine, Mama. I have to go. I'm busy." She never asked how Mama was doing. Never asked if there was food in the house. Never sent money home even when she started getting a small allowance from school. The calls became shorter. Then less frequent. And Mama Rose, wise and patient as always, told herself, she is busy becoming great. I must not disturb her. She did not know that her daughter was not just becoming great. She was becoming someone who was slowly learning to forget where she came from. After graduation, Sandra walked out of university like a woman reborn. She had a degree, a sharp mind, beautiful clothes she had saved and bought carefully, and a confidence that turned heads everywhere she went. The city received her like a gift. Within months, she had secured a good job at a respected company, not through connections, but through pure brilliance. She sat in her first real office, at her first real desk, and felt something she had never felt before. Power. Real power. The kind that money gives. The kind that lets you walk into a room and not be afraid. She leaned back in her chair that first morning and thought of that little girl staring at passing cars on the village road. She smiled. I made it, she whispered to herself. I actually made it. Her rise in the company was fast. She was organized, hardworking, and sharp with her presentations. Her boss noticed her. Her colleagues respected her. And soon, she was invited to dinners, social events, and gatherings where only the city's finest people went. She bought an apartment. She bought nice clothes. She changed her hair, changed her voice, changed everything that could possibly remind anyone, or herself, that she had ever been poor. Her new friends were women with expensive handbags and loud laughter and husbands with important titles. They talked about travel and investment and interior decoration. And Sandra fit right in. She had worked so hard to belong here that she had carved herself a space with her own bare hands. But belonging to this new world had a price. The price was silence about her past. Her friends made sharp jokes about poor people, about village women who smelled like firewood and market stalls. They mimicked accents and laughed about people who wore bush clothes. Sandra always laughed along. She never defended anyone. She never said, actually, I know those people. Actually, my mother is one of those people. She just laughed and reached for her wine glass and looked away. Inside, something twisted and ached. But she pressed it down. She told herself she had worked too hard to let sentimentality destroy everything she had built. She told herself she would think about Mama later. Always later. But later never came. Mama Rose had stopped calling as often now. Not because she stopped loving Sandra, she could never stop. But because every call ended with Sandra sounding irritated or rushed, and Mama Rose did not want to be a burden to the daughter she was so proud of. She showed Sandra's graduation photo to every person in the village. She framed it and hung it on the wall of her small house. When neighbors asked, "How is Sandra?" Mama Rose would beam with pure joy and say, "She is doing so well. My daughter is a big woman now." She said it with such pride that it broke the hearts of people who knew Sandra had stopped calling. They said nothing. They only prayed silently that God would remind Sandra who had carried her here. David was not the kind of man Sandra had expected to fall in love with. She had imagined she would one day choose a wealthy man deliberately, calculate it, plan it, enter it like a business transaction. But David walked into her life the way real things always do, quietly and unexpectedly, leaving no room for strategy. He was introduced at a colleague's dinner party, and the moment he sat across from her and started talking, something in Sandra went completely still. He was not loud or showy. He was calm. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He was kind in a way that felt genuine, not performative, not polished for show, but real. He made her feel seen in a way that wealth alone never had. David was successful, that part was true. He ran a business that had taken years to build, and he carried himself with the ease of someone who had earned his confidence through hard work. His friends spoke highly of him. His employees loved him. Women admired him from across every room. But David did not seem interested in any of that. He was interested in Sandra. He noticed the way her mind worked, the sharpness of her thinking, the discipline she carried in everything she did. "You are not like other people," he told her one evening, looking at her with steady eyes. "There is something new that was built, not given." Sandra had smiled and looked away, because that was the truest thing anyone had ever said about her, and it terrified her. Their relationship grew slowly, the way strong things do. Dinners became conversations that lasted past midnight. Phone calls became a daily ritual. And slowly, love began to build between them, real love, the kind that does not need performance. David began to speak about the future. About a home. About children. About forever. And Sandra wanted all of it with everything inside her. But there was a shadow that followed every beautiful moment, a secret that sat in the corner of every conversation like an uninvited guest. Her mother. Her past. The village. The mud house. The worn sandals and the food trays and the rough hands of a woman who had given everything. Whenever David got close to asking about her family, Sandra felt her chest tighten. She smiled and redirected the conversation. "Always careful. Always afraid." David asked about her parents for the first time on a quiet Sunday evening. They were sitting together, and he was telling her about his own mother, a woman he clearly adored. "She made me who I am," he said simply. Then he looked at Sandra with that calm, curious gaze and asked, "What about yours? What is your mother like?" Sandra had prepared for this question. She had rehearsed the answer 100 times. So she smiled a measured smile and said, "She passed away when I was young. It was very hard." She watched his face fill with compassion and sorrow, and she felt sick to her stomach. Not because she had said it, but because it had come so easily. Because she had just killed her mother, the woman who was alive right now, probably praying for her at this very moment, with a single smooth lie. And she had not even flinched. Mama Rose had not seen her daughter in almost 3 years. 3 years of short phone calls and unanswered messages and dry festive seasons without a visit. She had prayed about it. She had cried about it privately, in the dark, when nobody could see. But she never stopped believing in Sandra. "My daughter is working hard," she told herself every time the loneliness became heavy. "She is building her future. I must not be selfish." But one morning, she woke up with a feeling in her chest she could not explain, a pulling, an urgency, a mother's instinct that cut through all the excuses. She needed to see her child. She packed a small bag, wore her best wrapper and blouse, and boarded a bus to the city. She found Sandra's address the way country mothers always find things, through persistence and prayer and asking strangers with humble boldness. She stood in front of Sandra's apartment building and felt a mixture of pride and nervousness. The building was tall and clean and beautiful. "My daughter lives here," she whispered to herself, and her eyes filled with tears of joy. She went inside and knocked on Sandra's door with the same knock she had used since Sandra was a child, 3 light taps, then 1 firm one. When the door opened and Sandra's face appeared, Mama Rose opened her arms wide and cried, "My baby. My Sandra." Her whole face was lit with love so pure it hurt to look at. But Sandra did not step into those arms. She froze. Her eyes went wide and her face drained of color, because standing right behind her, inside the apartment, were 2 of her closest friends who had stopped by unexpectedly that same morning. Everything Sandra had built, every lie, every carefully crafted story, was standing right at the edge of a cliff. Mama Rose was looking at her with such love, still holding out her arms, still smiling, not yet understanding why her daughter had gone so stiff and cold. And Sandra, in that moment of blind panic, made the worst decision of her life. She stepped outside, pulled the door nearly shut, and looked at her mother with eyes that were no longer warm. "What are you doing here?" she whispered sharply. "I didn't tell you to come here." Mama Rose blinked. She thought maybe she had heard wrong. She smiled again, gently. "I missed you, my daughter. I just wanted to see." "You cannot be here," Sandra cut her off. Her voice was low but vicious. "I have guests. Important people. You have to go. Right now." Mama Rose looked down at herself, her best wrapper, her clean blouse, her small travel bag. And slowly, the understanding entered her eyes. She saw it clearly now. Her daughter was ashamed of her. She pressed her lips together and nodded slowly, the way strong people do when they are trying not to fall apart in public. She picked up her bag. She did not cry. She did not shout. She simply said, in the softest voice, "Okay, my daughter. Okay." And she walked away. She walked down the hall, into the elevator, out of the building, and out of Sandra's life. And Sandra watched her go and felt, for one brief, terrible second, an unbearable pain. Then she buried it. And went back inside to laugh with her friends. If you're still watching, let me know in the comments, do you think Sandra is right to be ashamed of her mother, or has she forgotten the sacrifices that brought her this far? And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe because the ending is something you won't want to miss. The weeks after Mama Rose's visit were strange ones for Sandra. She expected to feel free, she had removed the one thing that could expose her, after all. But instead, something in her apartment felt different. Quieter. Heavier. She would be in the middle of laughing at a dinner and suddenly stop and see her mother's face, that look in Mama Rose's eyes when she finally understood. That quiet, heartbroken nod. Sandra would push it away and pour more wine and talk louder. But it always came back. At night especially, the silence in her apartment pressed down on her like a hand. She started sleeping badly. She started looking in the mirror too long. She was not at peace. But she told herself it would pass. David, meanwhile, had started noticing things. He was a calm man but a careful one, and he paid attention in the way quiet people do. He noticed that Sandra never mentioned her mother anymore. He had believed the story about her mother passing away, but certain things did not add up. Once, Sandra had referred to her mother in the present tense. Another time, she had reacted strangely when he mentioned visiting her hometown. Small things. But David was the kind of man who did not ignore small things. He said nothing yet. But he began to watch more carefully. And he began, quietly, to ask around. What David discovered came in pieces, then all at once. A mutual acquaintance who had grown up near Sandra's village recognized her name and mentioned, without knowing what it would lead to, that Sandra's mother was still very much alive, a hardworking woman who sold food by the roadside and spoke of her daughter constantly. Then, through patient effort, David found someone who had actually witnessed the scene at Sandra's apartment, a neighbor who had seen an older woman in a wrapper and blouse walking away from the building, crying quietly. The pieces clicked together. He sat alone with this information for a long time. He felt the ground beneath his relationship shift and crack. He loved Sandra, God help him, he still did. But this was not a small lie. This was a woman who had denied and discarded her own mother. And that told him everything about who Sandra really was underneath the polish and the ambition. He found Mama Rose on a quiet afternoon. She was sitting outside a small rented room, peeling vegetables, and when he approached and told her who he was, she looked at him with calm eyes and said, "I know who you are. Sandra told me about you once, a long time ago." David sat down beside her and asked her about Sandra, expecting pain and bitterness. But what Mama Rose gave him instead was love. She talked about Sandra as a little girl, about her father's death, about the school fees, about the bright eyes and the big dreams. She did not say one cruel word about what had happened. When David gently brought it up, Mama Rose only sighed and said, "She is still my daughter. I carried her. Whatever she has done, she is still mine." David drove home that evening with his throat tight and his eyes hot. He had never in his life felt so much respect for a human being. And he had never felt such profound disappointment in another. The wedding was planned beautifully. Sandra threw herself into every detail with the same energy she gave everything, total commitment, perfect execution. The venue was elegant. The invitations were designed and delivered. The guest list included all the important names from Sandra's new world, wealthy friends, senior colleagues, respected people who represented everything she had worked so hard to belong to. She stood in the bridal shop and looked at herself in a long white dress and told herself this was it. This was the life she had fought for. David stood beside her in her imagination, tall and kind, and she felt something close to happiness. She just needed to get to the other side of this day. Then everything would be perfect and settled and safe. David sat across from Sandra at dinner one evening during the planning and watched her. She was radiant, organized, excited. He loved her, he knew he did, because even now, knowing what he knew, his chest ached when she smiled at him. He had spent weeks wrestling with himself. He had asked himself hard questions. Was this forgivable? Could people change? Was he being too rigid? But every time he tried to find a way to simply overlook it, he saw Mama Rose peeling vegetables alone in that small room. He saw that look on her face, not bitter, not angry, just quietly sad, still loving a daughter who had discarded her. And David knew he could not build a marriage on a foundation that had been laid over that kind of cruelty. So he made a decision. But he made it quietly, and he waited. Sandra noticed that David had grown slightly quieter in those final weeks, but she told herself it was pre-wedding nerves. Men always became strange before weddings, she reasoned. She was too busy to worry. She had a dress fitting, a cake tasting, a hair consultation, a flower arrangement meeting. She was moving so fast that nothing had room to catch her. But in her quietest moments, in the car alone, in the bath before bed, she thought about her mother. She wondered where Mama Rose was sleeping. Whether she was eating well. Whether she had told anyone what Sandra had done. And each time, Sandra pressed it down and moved faster. Guilt is a weight that gets heavier the longer you carry it and the faster you run. She called David the night before the wedding, and his voice was warm and calm. "Are you ready?" he asked her. And Sandra said yes with her whole chest, because she was ready to begin what she believed would be the most beautiful chapter of her life. She went to sleep that night smiling, with her white dress hanging on the door and her shoes lined up perfectly beneath it. She did not know that the most important guest at her wedding had already been found and invited. She did not know that everything was about to collapse. She did not know that God, or the universe, or simply the consequence of every buried choice, had been quietly arranging what was coming. She slept well that night. It was her last peaceful sleep for a very long time. The morning arrived golden and bright, the way mornings do when they are trying to warn you that everything is about to change. Sandra's friends arrived early with laughter and music and trays of food, and the room filled with the sweet, noisy business of women helping a bride get ready. Her hair was done beautifully. Her makeup was perfect. She slipped into the white dress and stood before the mirror and felt her breath catch. She looked extraordinary. All those years of hunger and hard work and hiding and climbing, she had climbed to this very morning, to this very mirror, to this woman staring back at her who looked like she had never known a hard day in her life. Her friends clapped and cheered. Someone cried happy tears. And Sandra smiled the biggest smile she had smiled in years. The church was full when she arrived. Beautiful arrangements of flowers lined every row. Guests turned and whispered and smiled. The music swelled as she approached the entrance. Sandra held her bouquet with steady hands and breathed slowly and looked down the aisle toward the altar where David stood, tall and handsome in his suit. She began to walk. The church was warm and glowing and perfect. She could feel the dream arriving with each step, closer and closer. Halfway down the aisle, she caught David's eyes and smiled. He looked at her with a calm, steady gaze that she could not quite read. Something in that gaze slowed her steps slightly. But she kept moving. She kept smiling. She was almost there. Then the church doors opened behind her. The sound cut through the music like a cool wind, and people turned. And Sandra, gripped by a feeling she could not name, turned too. And standing there in the doorway, in a clean, simple dress, with her hair pinned back neatly, and her wide shoulders and her rough hands held quietly at her sides, was Mama Rose. She did not walk in boldly. She did not make a scene. She stepped in quietly, the way humble people enter rooms, and stood near the back, as if she was not sure she had the right to be there. But she was there. Her eyes found Sandra's across the length of the church. And in those eyes was not anger. Not revenge. Only love. The most heartbreaking kind, the kind that forgives before it is even asked to. Sandra felt the bouquet tremble in her hands. Her legs became heavy. The whole church had gone quiet in a confused murmur. She turned back to David, and what she saw in his face in that moment told her everything. He knew. He had known for a while. He looked at her not with cruelty, but with deep and terrible sadness, the look of a man who has already grieved something and made his peace with it. He took one step toward her and opened his mouth, and Sandra felt the world tilt under her feet, because she understood that what came next would not be wedding vows. David's voice was quiet but carried through the whole church the way truth always does, without effort, without noise, landing in every corner at once. Before we begin, he said, I need to say something. The guests held their breath. Sandra stood frozen in white, her bouquet shaking, her eyes wide and bright with tears she had not yet let fall. David looked at her with sorrow and said, I love you, Sandra. I have loved you since the moment I met you. But I cannot marry a woman I do not fully know. And I did not fully know you because you hid the most important part of yourself from me. He paused. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform. He simply told the truth, calmly and completely, the way only truly heartbroken people can. He told the church everything. He told them about Mama Rose. About the village. About the sacrifices. About the day Sandra sent her own mother away from her door like a stranger, worse than a stranger, like a shame. He told them how he had found Mama Rose alone in a small room, peeling vegetables, and how she had not said one bad word about the daughter who had broken her heart. As he spoke, the church filled with a terrible silence, the kind that presses on your chest. Some guests pressed their hands to their mouths. Some bowed their heads. And Mama Rose, standing quietly near the back, closed her eyes and let a single tear run down her cheek. Not a tear of victory. A tear of old pain, finally being seen by the world. Sandra was crying fully now, great silent tears raining her perfect makeup, her whole body shaking. David, please, she whispered. But he shook his head slowly, gently. If you could look into the eyes of the woman who carried you, he said, the woman who starved herself so you could eat, who walked miles so you could go to school, who praised your name to everyone she met, if you could look into those eyes and tell her to leave because you were ashamed of her, then I do not know who you truly are inside. And I am afraid to find out. He removed the boutonniere from his lapel. He set it carefully on the altar. He looked at Sandra one last time with eyes full of love and full of goodbye, and he walked out of the church. His footsteps echoed. The doors closed behind him. And Sandra stood in the middle of all those witnesses, in her beautiful white dress, in the ruins of everything she had worked for, and she finally stopped running. She turned slowly. She looked toward the back of the church. And Mama Rose was still there. Still standing. Still watching her daughter with eyes that held no triumph, no punishment, only that devastating, boundless love. Sandra walked down the aisle, not toward the altar this time, but toward the back of the church, toward that small woman in the simple dress. Every step felt like a confession. Every step felt like something long overdue. When she reached her mother, she did not say anything at first. She simply dropped to her knees right there on that church floor, in front of all those guests, in her white wedding dress, and she wept. She wept from a place so deep and so long sealed that it sounded different from ordinary crying. It sounded like a door that had been locked for years being forced open at last. "Mama," she sobbed. "Mama, I am so sorry. I am so sorry." Mama Rose looked down at her daughter, this brilliant, foolish, proud, broken child she had carried and starved for and dreamed over, and she did what she had always done. She bent down and gathered Sandra into her arms. She held her tightly. She rocked her slightly, the way she used to when Sandra was small and frightened and the world felt too large. "I forgive you," she whispered into her daughter's hair. "I already forgave you." The church was completely silent now, and in that silence, something extraordinary happened. People began to cry. Old men. Young women. Even people who had come only for the celebration found their eyes burning. Because they were witnessing something that no carefully planned wedding could have given them. They were witnessing real love. The difficult, unconditional, undeserved kind. The kind that survives everything. David did not come back. That chapter was closed, and Sandra carried its weight honestly, without bitterness. She lost the wedding, the relationship, and the image she had spent years constructing. But what she found, kneeling on that church floor in her mother's arms, was something she had buried so long she had forgotten it existed, herself. The real Sandra. The girl from the village. The daughter of a woman who had given everything. She brought Mama Rose home that day. Not to a place of shame, but to a place of honor. She put her mother in the best room, cooked for her, called her name sweetly, introduced her proudly to everyone who would listen. It was too late for David. But it was not too late for the most important relationship in her life. And Sandra learned, the way we all must learn, some of us harder than others, that no dress is white enough to cover a stained heart, and no success is sweet enough if you drink it alone, having left behind the very hand that first lifted you up. What do you think about Sandra's story? Did she deserve what happened on her wedding day, or do you believe everyone deserves a second chance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, please subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who needs this lesson today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.